Welcome to the LPP podcast. LPP is the Life Process Program, a non-12-step program for people who want to ameliorate addiction and addiction-related issues in their lives. By the way, when I say addiction, I don't mean only drug and alcohol addiction, but also addictions to love, sex, gambling, pornography, technology, a whole range of other experiences. To learn more about the program or check out free resources like articles, videos, blogs, podcast episodes, related to solving addiction-related problems, visit our website at lifeprocessprogram.com or follow us on social media using any of the links in the show notes. You're listening to a segment called MMA, Monday Morning Ammunition. Some of our shows are long-form interviews. Monday Morning Ammunition episodes are short, educational segments that you might listen to during your morning routine or during your Monday morning commute. Today you'll hear part 1 of an 8-part discussion that I recorded with LPP creator, Dr. Stanton Peele. You may wonder, why are there 8 separate segments? That's because our program consists of 8 modules, each of which get you to think critically about different dimensions of your life and what you'd like to accomplish. So what better place to begin than from the beginning? You may now enjoy part 1 of 8, Module 1, Self-Reflection with Dr. Stanton Peele. I'm here with the creator of the Life Process Program, Dr. Stanton Peele. Stanton, thanks for joining me today.
Good evening, Zach. Good to hear you.
I want to spend some time today talking about the program, and by now, listeners are caught up on what the program is. This will be episode 12 for people who listen to the podcast. People sort of know what the program is, and they understand, at least vaguely, our philosophy. But one thing I keep talking about that I haven't really explored in detail is that while we offer group meetings and one-on-one sessions, at the foundation of the program are 8 distinct modules. And within each module, there are a series of written questions that participants will answer. And they're not just small talk, like get-to-know-you questions, but they're carefully considered questions that you've crafted that allow people to think critically and constructively about themselves. And when you put all those modules together, in the end, participants in our program will have documented in writing their best and most honest attempts at answering questions about each dimension of their lives. And so while I have you here, I'd like to talk about the concepts nested in each module and why spending time thinking about these kinds of questions is helpful for them in the process of overcoming addiction. That all sound all right?
Sounds excellent. I would just say, for me, therapy and motivational interviewing and the way you practice is a lot about asking people questions, because we're not imparting wisdom to people. We're helping them to think through who they are, what their issues are, and how they're going to move forward. It's an exercise in building up internal strengths and what's called self-efficacy or agency of the person. Perhaps people think it's unusual to go to therapy of some kind or get coaching, but nobody's actually got a bullhorn shouting at them, do this or do that.
That is a bit of confusion. In my experience, when people come in and they first make contact, I think they are sort of expecting that I'm going to tell them what they need to do. And perhaps there's a little bit surprised in a disarming sort of way that we're actually just asking them what they think's going on. That's a perfect segue into the first module, which is self-reflection. So people come to the program asking for help, and they know already, just tacitly, they're already saying to us something's off balance in their lives, and maybe they don't know how to articulate that problem. And they may not even know whether they're really addicted or what addiction is. And so the first module is a way that we get people thinking about their lives constructively and asking them, what are my problems? And are these problems addictions or something else? I'm wondering if you could speak to that and how you've constructed questions in order to get out of people some of these answers on their own.
Well, we don't do a heavy diagnostic trip on people. It's not your style. It's not my style. It's not our coach's style to say, oh, you've got this category of problem. We're there to first help them formulate what it is that they're concerned about, help them sharpen their thinking around what's the disconcerting aspect of their lives, what feels uneasy about it. And of course, the logic is before they contact us, we know nothing about them. We don't have any x-ray of their lives or their brains that's going to explain to us how they feel and what situations they're facing and what their concerns are. That can only come from the individual. But in the course of our trying to learn about those things, hopefully we're helping them to sharpen their own thinking about those things. So we don't mind if they say, no, you're not understanding me. We're fine with us saying, oh, good. Try and clear me up a little bit better about that.
I work with high school students during the day, and one of their big projects for seniors in high school is that they have to answer sets of questions about their own values. And one of my gripes with these sets of questions that we ask these high school kids are, we ask them an enormous question without context. So we say, what do you care about? What do you value? That's one of those things where there's so many answers you can't think of one. So can you talk about the ways we sort of segment the questions, or I don't know what the right word would be. We break the questions down to their smaller component parts. So
the first module is self-reflection. We want to get people into the style of what LPP, Life Process Program, is about, which is one of thoughtful mindfulness and self-planning. So we're getting them introduced to what's going on, but in lieu of doing an assessment, some kind of DSM-5 diagnosis, we do want to lay out the groundwork for what's going to take place. We want to know what their life is about, what their issues are, whether those issues fall in the addiction realm. And when we're very flexible about talking about addiction. We're not saying people meet some diagnosis of dependence. We're saying, well, you have some kind of an issue which involves you're doing something more than you want to do, and the feedback you're getting and the consequences are negative. Why am I doing that? What am I doing that falls in that category? Why am I doing that? What kind of feelings do I get from it? And what's going on in the rest of my life? We're laying the groundwork, the platform for where we're going to proceed from here. And we also ask them, well, what is it you would hope to attain? We want to set some goals. We want to find out what would be a satisfactory conclusion, or how will they know they're making progress? How will we know that they're making progress?
In addition to all of that, sometimes the things that people want to clear up in their lives may or it may not be what they would call themselves an addiction. So when we ask those questions and then they give us the answers, there could be, if we weren't careful about it, this awkward moment where they're going along doing exercises and thinking, well, when are we going to get to the addiction stuff? But I like that we actually asked them, so given all this, do you think you have an addiction? And that's not a make or break. And no answer to that question doesn't mean that, well, let's junk our therapeutic relationship. Will you talk about that just a moment?
Well, we don't feel there's some kind of, we think addiction is a sliding scale. There are obviously people with worse addictions than others, and there are just as obviously people who are trending in a direction that wouldn't be clinically called an addiction, but which has aspects of addiction. For example, they periodically end up in some kind of a cycle where they're just treading water or grinding gears and not going ahead. And that's addiction-like. It's trying to think about a problem in a way that will allow them to get some traction. And addiction is that kind of a thing squared or to the 10th power. But those mechanisms, that way of why are you getting rewarded in some strange way for doing something that's harmful and dysfunctional, is a kind of thinking, a kind of tool that you and I have learned from dealing in very bad addictions that can apply to people which wouldn't be called addicted by anybody. And we certainly don't want to tell them you're addicted. And I know you are like me, we tend to avoid answering that question. Well, I mean, if somebody says, am I addicted? What do you say to them, Zach? Well, how do you respond to that?
I usually turn it back to them and ask what they mean by addiction and what they think that would mean and how it relates to their lives. How about you?
Well, we do have that exercise. We ask them, what do you think addiction is? Of course, the answer often in our society is some kind of brain chemistry, and we can make a joke and say, oh, we don't have any MRIs here, especially if we're online. We're just going to look at the consequences for your life. And then we say, tell me about what you're concerned about. Tell me why you do it. And tell me what the consequences are. I'll usually say something like, well, that's not something I want to make a decision about in your life. You need to think about how badly something is harming you, and you need to reflect on that. And you need to reflect on, we're building a groundwork here, what is leading you down that harmful path. So I don't want to be evasive with people. I mean, I guess I would tell them the program is about things that are like addictions, but we're not here to label you as an addict, and we'd prefer that you didn't think of yourself as an addict. We're here, that's an important component in what we do. We don't want you labeling yourself or thinking that you follow some preset pattern that's called addiction. And we certainly don't want you to end up declaring yourself, oh, I'm an addict, or labeling yourself, or certainly we don't want you saying things like, well, I'm a lifelong alcoholic. We're against the whole idea that people formulate their identity around some label, especially some addiction label.
In that line, what would you say to a person who says, well, if we said, are you addicted? Do you believe that you're addicted or that you have an addiction? Why or why not? And they say, yes, I do, because I'm a lifelong alcoholic.
Well, I guess the first question I might ask them is, gosh, what appealed to you about this program? Where did you learn that? Somebody tell you that? What makes you think that way? And then I'd say, what made you come to our program? Ironically, when you tell me that, when I had a residential rehab, I would go there and there'd be a certain number of people who were in a non-disease program, which cost quite a lot of money. They had often failed out of we were often the last stop on the train where they had, been in and out of regular rehabs. And so I know why they thought they, were alcoholics or drug addicts. And then I said, I would say, well, how did that help you? We're going to try a little bit of a different approach. So maybe you could just sit back a little, rest, and don't lose that thought. But let's just try and start with a fresh slate. Things haven't gone that well for you in the past. In rehab and treatment, we're going to try a slightly different way of circling in on the problem.
So one way or another, when people do self-reflection, which is a series of 10 sets of exercises, we've had people explain to us what they think that their problems are and what their goals are and sort of the way their minds are trending. It might not be the way that we think about addiction or we think about problems, but we know what they think about their own problems.
Now, we do have readings, of course. You and I have been going over those where I've written this originally and other people have inputted, where we give the data, the research, the reasoning that says calling yourself an addict, certainly labeling yourself a lifelong addict, isn't useful, and it's not true in the sense that people get over addictions all the time. And often you can talk to the person and they've given up an addiction. For example, they may have quit smoking. They're here for something. And you can begin by saying, oh, have you ever had a really bad habit that you had to get rid of? And they say, right, well, I quit smoking. And then, you can inform them that that's kind of the toughest addiction to quit.
Yeah, right.
And then everything that we're doing is geared towards empowering people, giving them a sense of agency. The bottom line has to be when they are done the LPP, that they feel capable of managing their own life and planning ahead because, we do a lot. They can contact us as long as they like and follow up. But the name of the game is living your life and going out in the brave new world and feeling that you're able to handle it. And so, I have lines like, it's a little hard for me to call myself an expert when you are pretty good about knowing how to quit an addiction in your own life, you've already done that.
Mm.
And I'm doing two things. I do want them to reflect on why they did that, how they did that, which will feed into other things. And I certainly want to empower them to know that they can do it.
So when people have quit one addiction, yet believe that they're destined to be addicted forever to something else, they either haven't made the connection in their minds that, well, it was possible to quit one addiction, so therefore why wouldn't it be possible to quit another one through the same circumstances or same measures, or they've made the connection and for whatever reason believe that there's something inherent about this other addiction, whether it's a drug or gambling or sex, that is not possible to ameliorate. And so in the first module, we're allowing them to lay out what exactly do they want to accomplish. And one way or another, we're making it possible for them to see to the greatest extent possible that they have the agency to accomplish those things. Is that a fair summary?
That's great. That's a great summary. Yeah. And we'll throw in information like people report smoking is the hardest. Smoking is the longest lived addiction. When they calculate up, when they do surveys of people, and they look at dependencies on illicit drugs, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, on alcohol, and on smoking, the one that lasts the longest is smoking. So it's almost like you can jump up, shake their hands, and say, "I just want to congratulate you. You've given up the toughest addiction that there's possible to give." And when I give lectures and all, after I say to people, "What's the toughest addiction to quit?" they shout out smoking. And I say, "Oh, has anybody in this room quit smoking?" And a ton of people raise their hands. And then I say, "Oh, did you use Chantix or nicotine replacement or join a support group?" And hardly anybody has. And then when I say, "Wow, what are you telling me?" some people will start arguing with me and saying, "Well, smoking's not really an addiction. Like what heroin might be the number one thing they might call." And I said, "Well, I asked you all that question, and I'm sure you could have explained to me why you felt it was the toughest addiction to quit. Let's put that on the side table, but let's just say the research shows that it's the longest lived addiction. And your original response is something that the data back support." We're not sitting there trying to argue with them. We're not having a disease debate, but we want at least to lodge the idea in their thinking.
So when people are at the end of that first module, they're starting to think, all right, I've got goals. They may seem lofty. How do I even begin to think about accomplishing these things? And that's a nice tie-in to the next module, of course. They're chronological.